It always begins in the quietest hour, the hour when most of the world is asleep, and the air carries secrets it refuses to share during daylight. 3:11 in the morning, that strange slice of time when clocks feel slower, shadows feel thicker, and the faintest noise can sound like a warning. That was when I first heard it, a whisper dressed as static, crawling from the edges of an old radio I hadn't touched in years. I remember the room being perfectly still, save for the low hum of the heater and the restless shuffle of my own insomnia. The frequency wasn't supposed to exist. It sat between two dead stations, a sliver of nothing where only white noise should have lived. But that night it wasn't empty. It was speaking, not with words, but with a rhythm too deliberate to dismiss as chance. 3 slow pulses. A pause. 3 more. A lullaby for the sleepless, or a key trying to fit the wrong door. At first, I thought it was a trick of exhaustion. My mind, heavy from nights without rest, building patterns out of chaos. But when I turned the dial away, the room felt wrong. The quiet became oppressive, like the walls were waiting for me to turn back. And I did. Because curiosity, or something older than curiosity, wouldn't let me go. They say every obsession starts small, a sound in the dark, a light on the horizon, a question you can't stop asking. For me, it began with that frequency. It didn't promise answers. It promised the idea of them. And in those strange hours, that was enough. I started leaving the radio on, night after night, letting the static seep into the corners of my apartment like fog. Then came the reports. Scattered online, buried in forums that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Stories of truckers falling asleep at the wheel near mile 19. Of late-night travelers waking on the wrong side of the state, hours unaccounted for. And always, somewhere in the background, that same faint pattern. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. By the time I found the coordinates, I was already too deep to turn back. They pointed to a stretch of highway rarely traveled, a place locals said was just road and rocks. But in the sleepless part of the night, they whispered something else, something about a door, and a name scratched off every map. This isn't just about a sound anymore. It's about what waits when you follow it. And if you're still listening at this hour, I should warn you. It doesn't matter whether you believe. The signal isn't asking for belief. It's asking for your attention. And once you've heard it, it remembers you. The road to mile 19 is a ribbon of asphalt forgotten by time, the kind of stretch where the horizon folds into itself and the stars feel just close enough to listen. I drove it in silence, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the fog, the radio still tuned to that phantom frequency. 3:11 had come and gone, but the whispering static lingered like a scent on my clothes. I told myself I was only curious, only looking. But by the time the mile marker emerged from the dark, I already knew I'd been expecting. The checkpoint appeared without warning, a skeletal structure of rusted barriers and a cabin slumped in the ditch like it had given up decades ago. No lights, no guards, no sign of life. Just a faded sign half buried in the weeds. Authorized access only. The letters bled into the night, as if they'd been trying to warn travelers long after the world stopped listening. I killed the engine. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was thick, weighted, the kind that doesn't just fill a space but swallows it. No crickets, no wind rattling the fence, only the low groan of the earth itself. For a moment, I thought the static had followed me, hiding beneath the hum of the engine. But now it is gone. Completely gone. The cabin door creaked open on its own, nudged by nothing I could see. Inside, dust lay in soft, perfect sheets, and the air smelled like damp paper. Old maps curled on the walls, their ink eaten by time. A single corridor stretched beyond, a tunnel of concrete and steel, descending like a scar carved into the earth. At the end, half buried beneath decades of dirt and neglect, stood the door. It was massive, reinforced, its edges sealed by bands of corroded metal that once held authority. Across the surface, one phrase remained legible: Archive 9. No government emblem, no warnings in red, just that name, clean, clinical, and wrong. I pressed my ear against the cold surface. Nothing. No echo of machines, no hiss of air vents, only the pressure of a space holding its breath. But then, as my hand slid across the seam where steel met the floor, a flicker broke the darkness. Not bright, not like a bulb or a flashlight, but thin, trembling, like moonlight through cracked shutters. It came from the other side. I crouched lower, pulse thick in my throat, trying to find the source. The light flickered again, just once, then stilled, leaving the outline of the door even heavier in the dark. It didn't belong in a place that was dead. It felt deliberate, like a signal, or a mistake left waiting for the wrong eyes to find. I should have turned back. Every mile between that place and the nearest town was a mile of silence heavy enough to bury a man. But the door wasn't just locked. It was holding something in. The air tasted of dust and secrets, and the longer I stayed, the more it felt like the night itself was leaning closer, waiting to see what I would do next. When I finally stepped back, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A faint groove in the gravel, like tire tracks that began nowhere and ended just shy of the threshold. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. Just a mark that said someone or something had made it this far and vanished. I remember whispering, "Who built you?" Not expecting an answer. And in that moment, the static from the radio hissed to life in the car behind me. 3 pulses. A pause. 3 more. I wasn't alone. The air inside the archive was colder than the night I'd left behind. It clung to my skin with the stillness of a place that had been sealed far longer than anyone would admit. Dust curled like ash around my boots, each step a muted echo swallowed by the concrete walls. The static from the radio had followed me here, faint, muffled now, as though the walls themselves were listening and adjusting their breath. Rows of obsolete terminals lined the corridor, their screens blank but humming faintly, like dormant hearts still keeping time with something buried deeper below. I brushed a layer of grime from the nearest monitor and it flickered, spitting lines of green across the black. No power cables, no generator I could see. Just life, returning as if it had been waiting for a signal. The interface was crude, government standard from decades past, but the files were wrong. Each one was named in the same cryptic format. Strings of numbers followed by a single word. Most were corrupted, their data fragmented into meaningless symbols. But a handful opened. Inside, blurred images of constellations I didn't recognize, each labeled with coordinates that didn't exist on any chart I'd ever seen. The stars were there but rearranged, like a sky forced into a pattern that defied memory. Then came the audio. The first file hissed to life with a stutter of static before unfolding into a low, modulated tone. Slow pulses layered with something beneath, something almost like breathing. It lasted only 12 seconds, but when it stopped, the silence it left behind was heavier than before. The second file, That one I almost wish I hadn't played. A voice, barely human, threaded with distortion, reading a list of names. Some were marked cleared. Others pending. The final column read only phase, sleep protocol. I leaned closer, scanning the attached documents. Declassified headers from agencies that officially don't exist. Handwritten annotations in faded ink. Subject retains memory fragments during delta cycle, repeat exposure. That was when it hit me. This place wasn't about storing information. It was about planting it. Dreams weaponized. Thoughts as carriers, delivered while you slept. Nightmares that weren't yours, seeded like spores into the minds of anyone who drifted close enough to hear that frequency. One folder stood out, its digital tag flickering as if fighting to remain visible. Arch 9_SLP_initiate. I opened it. Pages unfolded, one after another. Schematics of something that resembled both a radio tower and a sleeper's mask. Blueprints drawn with precision and haste. Testimonies from volunteer dreamers, each ending abruptly mid-sentence. And a single photograph, a group of scientists standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes blank, every one of them caught mid-blink, as if frozen between waking and dreaming. Behind them, etched on the wall, were those same words. Sleep protocol, active. My pulse kicked against my throat. The documents weren't dated. They could have been 50 years old. They could have been yesterday. The terminal beside me blinked awake on its own, its glow stretching long shadows across the floor. A message began to type itself, one letter at a time. You are already registered. The cursor blinked. I stepped back, breath clouding in the cold, and every terminal in the row sparked to life at once. Screens filled with those star maps, those breathing tones. The walls seemed to draw closer, humming with the same rhythm I had heard on the radio. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. Sleep wasn't just a state here. It was a signal, a key, and I had just turned it. The deeper I dug into the archive, the more the walls seemed to whisper in return. In a locked cabinet, one that should have rusted shut decades ago, I found the files. Thin, yellowed folders marked with the same cryptic seal I had seen before. Archive 9. No names on the outside, only dates and a word burned faintly into the paper. Retrieval, incomplete. Inside were fragments. Memos, blurred photographs, and a logbook that smelled of damp iron. The handwriting was frantic in places, almost clawed into the page. It spoke of a research crew, 9 in total, brought here under the guise of signal analysis. Their task? To decode transmissions that no official network admitted existed. The logs dated back over 20 years, yet the ink looked disturbingly fresh, like someone had handled these files only hours ago. The crew worked in rotating shifts, the note said. Nights were their obsession. Between 2 and 4 a.m., they claimed, the transmissions were strongest, long, droning frequencies layered with patterns they believed to be mathematical in origin. But then the notes began to drift from science into something else. Mentions of headaches, of waking up in hallways they didn't remember walking down, of strange lights bleeding through sealed doors. One page described the final night in detail. A heavy hum rising from the hills, rattling windows 20 miles away. Locals reported their livestock panicking. Dogs howling in unison. At 3:11 a.m., all 9 researchers entered the lower vault to intercept what they called the primary sequence. None of them came back. The log stops there. No signatures, no closure. Just a torn corner where the next page should have been. I stared at the empty space, wondering if it had been ripped out in panic or in protocol. In the margin, a single line remained in pencil. If they sleep, they stay. If they stay, they're not alone. I stepped back, my hands cold despite the stagnant air. Outside, the wind, or what I thought was wind, rose into a low hum that matched the one described in the reports. It vibrated faintly through the floor, a sound you felt more than heard. Locals had spoken of that hum. In the forums, in the buried threads that vanished as soon as they gained attention, they called it the lull. It was said to drift across the valley some nights, pulling travelers off the main road, luring them closer to the checkpoint. Some claimed it carried voices, others that it carried nothing at all, just the promise of forgetting how long you'd been awake. I closed the folder and looked back down the corridor. Every terminal I had passed now glowed faintly, like the building itself had woken to my presence. And in that moment, standing where 9 people once vanished, I asked myself a question I couldn't shake. Would you have stayed and listened? Or would you have turned back, knowing what waited beyond the next locked door? I found it tucked behind a stack of files labeled classified. Sleep experiments. The tape was old, its casing yellowed, magnetic strip curling like a dying leaf. No markings beyond a single word etched in fading black marker. Hypnos. Something about it made the hairs on my arms rise. Not fear, not yet, but the sort of instinct that tells you the world has folded in on itself and you're standing in the crease. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the player. The air around me seemed to thicken. I'd spent nights awake, tracing frequencies and following static into silence. But this felt different. The walls seemed to lean in. The shadows from the blinking terminals stretched farther, brushing against the edges of my vision like curious fingers. I pressed play. At first, nothing. Then a tone emerged. Low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It pulsed like a heartbeat, soft at first, then insistent, filling the room with a vibration that seemed to penetrate bone and thought alike. I wanted to stop it, but my body betrayed me. Drawn forward by curiosity I no longer recognized as my own. Minutes passed, though I couldn't tell how many. Time had begun to fold the way the cruise logs had described. The room blurred at the edges. And then the visions started. The first was subtle. Walls elongating into impossible angles. Corners where hallways should never meet. Shadows moved against the grain of light, curling like smoke yet solid, reaching out without form or intention. Shapes that were clearly not human flickered just beyond comprehension. Limbs bending in ways that made the spine ache, faces fracturing like reflections in shattered glass. I blinked, though the visions persisted even behind closed eyes. The tape hummed beneath me, a lullaby of calculated chaos. Each pulse pressed against my chest, pulling me deeper, and with it came the memories I didn't know I had, flashes of places I had never visited, conversations I had never had, yet remembered in the recesses of my mind as if they were real. And then corridors appeared. Endless concrete tunnels that twisted impossibly, sometimes intersecting with themselves, sometimes leading into voids that swallowed sound and light. I walked them in the dark, hands grazing walls that felt warm to the touch yet cold in memory. Whispers rose from the floors, from ceilings, voices speaking in patterns that teased understanding, but never delivered it. I wanted to turn the tape off, but the rhythm had already ensnared me. The hypnosignal didn't just ask for attention. It demanded compliance. Sleep wasn't a choice. Eyes closed involuntarily, heart syncopating with the pulse, mind teetering on the edge between dream and observation. Then came the shapes, tall, impossible, faceless, moving in ways that suggested intelligence yet defied logic. One leaned close, tilting its head at an angle that no human skeleton could allow, and I could feel its intent without understanding it. It was studying me, cataloging, remembering, waiting. And somewhere beyond the corridor, the whispers morphed into laughter, not cheerful, not human, but full of rhythm and knowing, a sound that made the floor beneath me feel less solid. I saw the tape in my hands, spinning in slow motion, though I knew it was stationary. The labels on the cassette swirled into text I could almost read. Warnings in a language I shouldn't understand, instructions for a mind that wasn't ready, and beneath it all, one clear phrase repeating with a pulse. Do not fall asleep alone. I stumbled backward, reality snapping in jagged shards as the tape's pulse subsided. The corridors vanished, the shapes dissolved, leaving the walls and terminals of the archive intact. My chest heaved, body trembling, but the memory of what I'd seen, and the resonance of the signal, lingered in the air like a stubborn echo. I knew then the danger was not in being awake, nor in being curious. The danger was in being caught in the signal's rhythm, in letting it map you, catalog you, and eventually invite you to places that exist only while you are sleeping. And as I sat there trying to catch my breath, the hum from the tape continued faintly in my mind. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. I had activated it, and somewhere deep below it was waiting. The moment the hypnos signal ended, I felt disoriented, like I had waded through water that was thicker than air. My limbs moved sluggishly, though my mind refused to follow its usual rhythm. I glanced at the old analog clock on the wall of the archive. Its hands glowed faintly in the dim light. It read 5:17 a.m. Only minutes had passed, or so I thought. I had no sense of how long I'd been there. The terminal screens blinked in a rhythm I now recognized. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 more. The air was heavy, charged with the residue of the signal. I tried to take a step, to move, to shake off the lingering visions, but my body felt anchored to the floor. Hours of standing still had passed, though I hadn't moved an inch. The archives themselves seemed alive. The faint hum of electricity was a voice now, vibrating through the walls and floor. And then I heard it, faint at first, almost drowned beneath the residual pulse. My name. Michael. I froze. The sound wasn't mechanical, wasn't in the tape, and wasn't coming from any human source I could see. It echoed from every corner of the room at once, wrapping around me, coiling tighter with every heartbeat. My pulse kicked against my chest as I turned slowly, eyes scanning empty corridors lined with cold terminals. Nothing. Yet the whisper persisted, a soft insistence that made the air feel alive, breathing, watching. I stumbled toward the nearest terminal and pulled up the old security footage. The images made my stomach lurch. There I was, standing in the same spot, eyes wide open, perfectly still. Not for minutes. Not for the duration I had perceived. 3 hours. Every second recorded, every frame captured, unblinking and unwavering. I shook my head, trying to reconcile time with memory, but the archive refused to yield. The files, the tape, the walls, they existed in a different temporal rhythm, one that mocked human perception. Hours could vanish like smoke, leaving only the body to anchor the soul. And then, just as abruptly, the whisper returned, closer this time, deliberate. Michael. It was not a suggestion. It was a summons. I stepped back from the monitor, every nerve taut. The room felt smaller, the shadows longer, the hum deeper. I realized then that this place was not passive. It catalogued presence, remembered it, and perhaps even communicated with those it had trapped or summoned. The thought that I might not be the first or the last to experience this was suffocating. The screens flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a single heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure at the edge of my vision. Too tall, too fluid, impossible. When I looked directly, it vanished. But the feeling of being watched did not. And beneath it all, that pulse persisted. Not from the tape. Not from the terminals. But from the walls themselves. And within it, a whisper. My name again trailing off into the darkness, asking questions I didn't want to answer but could not ignore. I knew at that moment that leaving would not be enough. That whatever had called me here had left an invitation, subtle, insistent, and patient. And the archives were listening. The corridor ended at a steel hatch, cold and unyielding. Beyond it lay the chamber the logs had whispered about for decades, the place where the archive stored what the world should never see. The air here was heavier, saturated with the scent of paper, metal, and something faintly sweet, like ozone after a storm. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the latch. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet my curiosity had become a tether too strong to resist. The door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was vast and silent, walls lined with shelves, cabinets, and terminals long inactive, now humming faintly as if greeting a returning presence. But it was the photographs that caught me first. Hundreds, maybe thousands, each pinned to cork boards or propped against shelves. People slept in their own homes, completely unaware. Faces bathed in a light that didn't belong to lamps, moonlight, or the sun. Some faces were calm, some twisted in nightmares that clearly weren't of their own making. Every image felt deliberate, intimate, invasive. I moved closer, scanning the photographs, my chest tightening with unease. There was a pattern, each home subtly lit, each person captured mid-slumber, yet every light shimmered with an unnatural cadence, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, like the rhythm of the hypnos signal. My stomach nodded as I noticed that the timestamps on the photos didn't always match clocks or calendars I recognized. These weren't just snapshots, they were recordings of moments the world itself had forgotten. And then I saw it. A photograph of a small boy in a cluttered bedroom, eyes closed, face bathed in that same eerie light. The date, decades ago. The room, exactly as I remembered it. The photograph had been taken before I could have possibly known of the archive's existence. My hands trembled as I traced the image. My own face, captured asleep by forces I didn't yet understand, staring back at me with innocence I had long since abandoned. Every other photograph now seemed to shift slightly in my peripheral vision, almost imperceptibly. The archive felt alive, breathing, cataloging. I realized then that the chamber wasn't just observing the present, it was threading itself into my past, into memory, into the fragments of a life I thought mine alone. A terminal blinked to life at the edge of the room. Files scrolled across the screen, revealing logs I hadn't noticed in the shadows. Names, dates, locations, even the faint pulse patterns over time, linking sleepers like nodes in an invisible web. Each person had been touched by the archive, invited into its rhythm without consent, a silent network of the sleeping. I stepped back, the photograph of my childhood still in hand, and a chill ran down my spine. Questions I didn't have the courage to ask yet screamed silently. Why me? Why then? Who was watching, and how long had this been going on? And then I realized the archive had been waiting for someone to arrive who could follow the breadcrumbs through time and memory. Waiting for me. The chamber pulsed softly, almost imperceptibly, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Every heartbeat in my chest matched the faint rhythm of the unearthly light. And somewhere, deep within the steel and concrete, a whisper tickled the edges of my consciousness. You've always been here. The air tightened, the shadows deepened, and I knew the moment I stepped into this chamber, the archive had already claimed a piece of me, not in body, but in memory, in presence, in something that would never fully leave. The chamber's pulse had barely subsided when it began, a low, layered voice, emanating not from a speaker or terminal, but from the very walls themselves. Deep, resonant, impossible to locate. I froze, the photograph of my childhood trembling in my hand. We never left. You invited us in. The words wrapped around me like smoke, slow and deliberate, pressing into my chest. The air thickened, vibrating with a frequency I could feel in my bones. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt heavier than lead. The voice was not angry, not threatening. It was patient, knowing, like a predator explaining its inevitability. The lights cut abruptly. Darkness replaced the faint pulsing of the chamber, and alarms erupted, their shrill scream filling the room and echoing through tunnels I had yet to traverse. My ears rang, my heart thundering in my chest, but the voice persisted, layered now with subtle whispers overlapping in languages I couldn't recognize. I dropped the photograph, turning toward the exit as if sheer will could propel me past the metallic walls closing in. Every step was mirrored by shadows stretching impossibly long, and every shadow seemed to pulse with awareness. The walls were no longer inert, they were extensions of the voice, responding to my fear, guiding me, hurting me. I stumbled through corridors that should have been familiar, yet twisted unnaturally, hallways lengthening and bending around corners that never existed. The alarms and pulses from the terminals blended into a single omnipresent hum, vibrating through my chest and throat. It wasn't the building chasing me. It was the consciousness embedded within it, tracking, observing, cataloging every breath I took. And then, when I thought I had outrun it, the whisper returned, not from the walls, not from the terminals, but inside my head. A single phrase, repeated with the rhythm of a heartbeat. You cannot escape. Not even in dreams. I stumbled into an emergency stairwell, the metal steps slick with condensation. Each step seemed to echo backwards, as if time itself were folding against me. I reached the street outside, lungs burning, sweat mixing with the chill of the night. The archive loomed behind me, dark and silent once more, yet I could feel it pulsating beneath the earth like a buried heart. For a moment, relief threatened to wash over me. But then I felt it, the whisper beneath the skin, a memory of a sound that never truly left. It followed me home, insidious, threading into my sleep. That night, I dreamt of the chamber, of the flickering light bathing strangers asleep in impossible angles, of the tall, faceless shapes moving through corridors not meant for human eyes. And through it all, the voice echoed, patient and knowing. We never left. You invited us in. The realization settled like ice. The archive's reach was not physical alone. It was temporal, mental, and deeply personal. Escape was meaningless. Distance mattered nothing. It was already inside, mapping my dreams, cataloging my fear, threading itself into the unobserved corners of consciousness. I awoke hours later, unsure if it had been hours or seconds. The room was silent, the morning light creeping through blinds that could no longer offer comfort. And yet, somewhere beneath the edges of perception, I could still hear it. Not from the walls, not from the machines, but from inside me, soft and deliberate, a pulse that would not stop. We never left. And you invited us in. No amount of movement, no attempt to flee, could sever the connection. The voice had become a part of my rhythm, a shadow woven into the fabric of sleep itself. And deep down, I knew that every time I closed my eyes, the archive would be there, waiting. I woke to the low hum of my car engine, the gray light of dawn slipping through the windshield, soft and indifferent. My hands were still cold from the night, gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing anchoring me to reality. Outside, the road stretched empty and silent, as if the archive had never existed, as if mile 19 were nothing more than a forgotten dream. My head throbbed, memory fractured. I remembered corridors that twisted impossibly, the faces of sleepers bathed in alien light, and that layered voice, patient, insistent, echoing in my chest. And yet, here I was. The car was parked miles from the checkpoint, near a familiar turnoff, but nothing beyond the foggy horizon suggested the night I had endured. I glanced at my watch. The hands were frozen at 3:11, the same time I had first tuned into the signal. Hours, minutes, none of it made sense. I couldn't tell whether the Hypnos signal had stolen time, or if the archive itself had rewritten it. Every instinct screamed that I hadn't left. Maybe I had never left. The radio sat between the seats, silent now, static gone, as if it too had been a phantom. My chest tightened as the realization settled. This might not have been a physical journey. Perhaps it was a projection, a warning, a memory planted to prepare me for something that hadn't yet happened. Or something that always had. I tried to start the car, to shake the sense of weight pressing down on my spine. And then I heard it, not from the speakers, not from the road, but inside my skull, the faint echo of the Hypnos pulse. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. The rhythm of the archive, patient, deliberate, waiting. Questions I had tried to suppress resurfaced, sharp and insistent. Was the archive an abandoned experiment, or a living intelligence, stretching itself through memory, dreams, and perception? Were the photographs of sleepers simply evidence of control, or proof that its reach extended into lives I had once thought private, safe? And the voice, had it followed me here, threading itself through my sleep, embedding a warning or a claim? I sat in the car, staring out at the empty highway, heart hammering. The sky lightened, but the shadows lingered, not on the road, but in the periphery of vision, in the edges of thought. I realized that leaving the archive physically did not equate to leaving it at all. Something had already been embedded, a trace I could neither see nor erase. And as the first birds of morning began their call, I understood that the night was not over. Not for me. Not for the archive. And perhaps not for anyone who ever stumbled upon the signal, the static, the lights that should never have been. I turned the key in the ignition. The car purred to life. but the pulse continued faintly beneath the engine's hum. And in that quiet, I heard it clearly. A whisper threaded into thought, a reminder, and a warning patient, eternal. We never left. And you invited us in. The sun rose, indifferent, casting light on a road that no longer seemed ordinary. And I understood, with a chill that would never fade, that some doors cannot be closed, and some signals never truly end. The car idled, the engine's hum blending with the whisper of wind across the empty highway. My mind replayed every corridor, every flickering terminal, every pulse of the hypno signal. But there was one thing I hadn't yet seen: the final log buried deep in the last terminal I had touched before fleeing the chamber. Something told me it wasn't meant to be found, at least not by anyone awake. I pulled my laptop from the passenger seat, fingers trembling as I connected it to the old archive drive I had salvaged. The screen flickered, hesitant at first, then filled with lines of text I could barely process. The header read, "Open transmission. Initiate. New Dreamers." The log wasn't written like the others. It was a set of instructions, a manifesto of sorts, calling out to anyone listening at precisely 3:11 a.m. It detailed how to receive the signal, how to interpret the pulses, and, disturbingly, how to survive the visions. But beneath the instructions lay the unmistakable undertone of anticipation, an invitation that transcended language. "New dreamers are always welcome," the transmission began, a line repeated like a mantra in the background code. "Every night at 3:11 a.m., the archive listens. It waits. It remembers. It records. You will see, you will hear, and you will become part of the rhythm." I froze as the implications hit me. The archive wasn't dormant. It never had been. Every person it touched, every pulse it sent, was part of a cycle, an ongoing experiment, an eternal observation. I didn't sleep. I didn't forget. And it could reach anyone who tuned in at the right or wrong moment. The words on the screen blurred as my pulse quickened. The familiar 3-beat rhythm returned, faint yet undeniable, threading itself through the room, through the car, through my skull. The whispering, patient voice returned, echoing in tandem with the pulses. "We are still here. We are always listening." The log concluded with a final line, chilling in its simplicity. "If you hear the signal tonight, don't fall asleep. Or do, and tell us what you saw." I leaned back, staring at the fading glow of the screen. Outside, the world was waking, oblivious to the archive's reach. But I knew better. The rhythm, the light, the whispers, they were patient, eternal, and waiting for the next listener. And for the first time, I realized that the archives didn't merely observe. They were invited. They were selected. And they never stopped. The highway stretched ahead, quiet, infinite. And somewhere just beneath the surface of perception, the pulse continued. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more, calling, coaxing, haunting.